Hello and welcome to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I'm Ksenia Svetlova. ROPES stands for the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. We are a young organization that works to lay the groundwork for a post-conflict Middle East by connecting forward-thinking Israeli and Palestinian emerging leaders with like-minded peers across the region. We share a holistic vision for the Middle East, where everyone has more to win from conflict resolution and integration than to lose. If you are looking for more information on ROPES, please visit our website, ropes.org. And our very special guest today is Rabbi Elhanan Miller, the founding director of the People of the Book. People of the Book is an educational nonprofit that teaches Jewish faith and culture to Muslim audiences. Using viral videos disseminated on social media, the initiative currently boasts some 500,000 subscribers and millions of monthly hits, mostly in the Arab Middle East. Elhanan Miller is a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, specializing in Arab and Israeli politics and intersection of Judaism and Islam. And often he is a guest at the studios in English-speaking and Arab-speaking channels. He is fluent in English, Hebrew, Arabic, French, and Yiddish. Hello, Elhanan, and welcome to ROPESCAST.
Hi, Ksenia. Thanks so much for having me on ROPESCAST. It's nice to be with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Listen, you got me with the Yiddish, because many of our guests speak Arabic, but I think you are the first one, actually, that, is proudly puts his knowledge of Yiddish. How did that happen?
Well, I took German in university, but it was always with the goal of going back to my own roots and going back to my origins. And just like I am very interested in interviewing Arabic speaking Jews who maintain their ancestral languages, which is Arabic, I also was always interested in my family languages, and the mother tongue of my grandparents, their first language was Yiddish. And I always wanted to sort of go back to that. So I proudly display that as well on my bio.
Listen, so let me guess. So Arabic is not your mother tongue.
No, it's not, but it's the regional language, of course. And it's my third language and my first foreign language. In other words, I grew up speaking English and Hebrew from birth, basically. And the first language I studied actively was Arabic in seventh grade or 13 at school. And it was a love story. It was love at first sight. And I didn't ever stop learning Arabic since I was 13. So that's been 30 years now.
So I know a lot of 13-year-olds that in Israel, they have to study Arabic because it's mandatory, at least in secular schools. And they don't particularly love it because, they say it's boring, but there is also something else there. There is the image of an enemy language. There is this feeling of, we are fighting them, so why do we have to learn their culture? Why do we have to learn their language? An approach that, of course, I think like you are, it's very damaging and it's very dangerous, specifically in the neighborhood where we live. So how did you feel about Arabic when you were 13?
Yeah, I never had that attitude. I was always infatuated by the language. I think it was a very kind of modern curriculum for the time. We learned it through comic strips. That was the textbook. So it was very friendly to 13-year-olds. But of course, the dilemma of which Arabic to teach, meaning do we teach the spoken communication, colloquial language, or do we teach the formal standard Arabic? That's a dilemma that I think Israel hasn't managed to solve yet. And the result is that it does neither, and it does neither very well. And yeah, kids are bored by it because they don't see the need for it. You really don't need Arabic to get along as a Jewish Israeli in Israel. Yeah. And in addition to that, there's this idea of the enemy language. So unfortunately, this is a structural problem in Israel that it's very hard to overcome. On the other hand, I think now in recent years, there's been more and more interest in Arabic among Jews because of cultural reasons like TV series, music, and also people, I think, connecting to their own family origins, just like I did, people who have Iraqi grandparents or great grandparents. I think Israel is kind of coming of age and is realizing the importance of even Arabic as a Jewish language, at least in the past.
Well, the nationality bill that passed in 2017, yes, almost 18, degraded the Arabic language in status. Do you think that it also resulted in even less interest towards Arabic in the formal education system?
Not necessarily. I think there wasn't much to deteriorate from, even in 2017, 2018. The official status of Arabic never meant that much. Maybe meant something about street signs or some official documents, but it didn't really trickle down, I would say, to the grassroots level. I think people will have to vote with their own feet, as so to speak. They'll have to decide themselves that Arabic is an important language. I think what will really happen is regional developments and regional peace with our Palestinian neighbors, with our neighboring countries, which is something, of course, that Roots contributes to, that my organization tries to promote. And we try to normalize Israel's existence in the Middle East and see Israel as an integral part of this. And here, the Arabic is a clear majority language. It's the regional language. So it would be like living in Benelux and not speaking French. It would be if Israelis see themselves more and more as part of the region, which is a process which will take time, then I think Israelis themselves will understand the importance. And I think they do. I think you probably know, Ksenia, somebody who also speaks Arabic, that every second Israeli that you meet and learns that you know Arabic is like, oh, I wish I spoke Arabic. It's probably the most common response that we Jews who speak Arabic get. And I think it can be encouraged and it can be facilitated and the government can help. But I don't think it will take much effort actually to convince Israelis that they need Arabic.
Well, I can tell you frankly, I hope that I had your optimism. I used to be much more of an optimist before I was a Knesset member. I always say that because in Knesset we actually succeeded to pass the bill at preliminary reading, recognizing the necessity of teaching Arabic language since the first grade in Israel. And it was something that the coalition, the governing coalition, which was, of course, also back then right-wing, Likud, they supported it, but unfortunately, for lack of funding and lack of interest in the Ministry of Education, it did not go anywhere much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you know, somebody who was in politics, I guess official politics has its limits, especially in the current climate, the current political climate in Israel. But at the end, I think government also responds to the voices from the public. So it will need to be the public that demands this. And then hopefully sometime in the future, the government will accommodate or facilitate that.
So, Elhanan, you mentioned the organization that you run, the People of the Book, which, of course, in Arabic, who speaks Arabic immediately can catch, the phrase, of course, the Ahl al-Kitab, that something that refers to Jews and Christians. How did you come up, with the name and with an idea for your project? And what is a project, for those unlucky few who still do not know it and still do not tune to your videos, please?
Yeah, they should know about it. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I launched Ahl al-Kitab 8 years ago, and the idea came before the name. The name came second. The idea was that I was invited to teach a group of Palestinians about Judaism. And the questions they asked me were very different than I had anticipated. They were very basic questions about practice. Um, and I immediately realized that if these were the very basic questions about ritual, about kosher food, about prayer that our Palestinian neighbors have, and these are people who speak Hebrew and interact with Jews, there must be a broader Arab world out there of at least 500 million, Arabic speakers. And if I imagined even more broadly, 2 billion Muslims out there who have no idea about these basic things about Judaism. So that showed the potential and the need to speak to people in the region about these issues that they're curious about already and have nowhere to turn to learn about them. There was really nothing out there, no material out there online that explains Judaism to Arabs in Arabic. Of course, there are many Muslims and Christian clerics and professors who try to explain Judaism, but it's often from a very biased and partisan, let's say, position. So that's how the idea was born. And then the question of the name came up. Well, what do I call my project? It's going to be on social media. It'll be online. But what name do I use? Do I just say El Yahud? Do I say, like, what term do I use? And as someone who studied Islam, the term Ahl al-Kitab immediately came to mind as a more favorable title or category of divine religions that include Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, who received a divine book, a book from God. And Islam as a religion recognizes the two religions that preceded it, Christianity and Judaism. Islam acknowledges the validity of the Torah and of the New Testament as holy books, but of course debates them and says that they went through a process of falsification and change. But nevertheless, the term Ahl al-Kitab is a term that's positive in Islam, that's positive in the Quran. And I thought that that encapsulates the goal behind my project, which is to introduce these two religions to a Muslim audience in a way that's polite, respectful, favorable, and at least in the first stages also highlights the commonalities and the common denominators between the religions. As the project developed in coming years, I also spoke about differences and conflict. But at least in the first stages, which was the first few years, I focused mostly on the good and the common.
And what kind of reactions did you started to get when you first developed the project? I'm asking because, there are so many misinformation and also intentional fake news and also bias that exists. I can just recall from my own personal history. I was once questioned by young students in one of the Egyptian universities. They asked me whether the Jews actually drink blood, whether they use the blood of Christians or Muslims for the Passover for the matzah, which is the classic blood libel, of course. And boy, I was was so sorry back then, that I didn't have some resource to tell them, listen, but this is the attitude in Judaism towards the use of blood. It's complete ban, and it's not true. But then they just had to rely on my word. So what did people tell you? Like, oh, you're lying. Oh, it cannot be true. What did you hear from the street?
Yeah, great. So you're right, Ksenia. I mean, basically, we're starting out from a very low point in this attempt of dialogue because we have classic anti-Semitism, like the one you mentioned in Egypt, right? Like Christian blood libels that entered Islam. We have anti-Jewish attitudes inside Islam in the Quran, right? Verses we can't ignore that say very terrible things sometimes about Jews. And above and beyond all of that, we have the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which adds another layer of hostility and anger and animosity. So this is what we need to deal with. And of course, all of this comes up in a project like this because they're exposed to something new in their YouTube feed, in their Facebook feed, something they never saw before. A Jewish person speaking Arabic in a courteous way, in a polite way, who knows how to quote their scripture, but also tells them that he's not there to convert them to Judaism, and is not trying to advocate for the state of Israel or Israel's politics. So my viewers were very confused at the beginning. They wondered whether I was a government agent, whether I was being funded by the government, what was my agenda. Muslims don't really understand the issue of teaching a religion just for academic reasons. They always think it has to do with conversion and trying to convert you because that's how Islam and Christianity act, right? They try to convert and proselytize. So the whole project was very strange to many of my viewers. Still to this day, I get questions of like, what is your agenda? What are you trying to accomplish? So I think that at first there was much more suspicion, and as they got used to me and as they saw my face every week with new videos and consistently over years, they started realizing that I'm just a content creator. I'm a YouTuber, just like the ones in the Arab world, and I just want to teach. I can't say that everyone is convinced by that. And of course, a lot of the political issues come up. It's very hard for them to distinguish between Israel or Zionist ideology, which they don't exactly know how to define, but they know it's something terrible and bad. And what's the relationship between Israel, Zionism, and Judaism? I think it's too big of a mission for me to try to clarify and break down all of those topics. I did dedicate one cartoon, one video that I produced to Zionism and Judaism. I have to say it didn't receive that much traction. It didn't receive so many views. So I focus on the religion, but I focus on religion and faith as a vehicle to normalize Jews and by extension Israel in the Middle East. So it is outreach, and you could say that it's a form of advocacy, but a very, very subtle, round, like the sort of not indirect form of Israel advocacy. Um, and I don't work for any government, and I'm not funded by any government agency. I completely rely on donations by foundations, mostly Jewish foundations. Um, but I was supported in the early stages, especially by the Foreign Ministry of Israel, when I really needed those views and those shares and exposure. Very early on, the Israeli Foreign Ministry, which operates a huge social media presence called Israel Tatakallam bil Arabiya, Israel Speaks Arabic. And they liked my content because they also like soft power, they like culture. So they would share some of my cartoons and some of my videos. And to this day, there's an informal sort of partnership with the Foreign Ministry and other organizations that create content in Arabic, but mostly it's the Foreign Ministry. And I owe them a debt of gratitude, but they know it's an unequal partnership. I can't share Foreign Ministry content for the most part, unless it's very, very rarely that they'll do something cultural that I can share. But I'm very careful and very wary of not seeming to my audience as an agent of Israel, as an official agent or a spokesperson, because I'm not. I didn't intend this project to be that. But just to summarize, yes, I do believe that my project is meant to normalize the Jewish presence in this land, to allow Arabs to get accustomed to Jews in the region. And that's I guess, the overreaching strategy of my project.
I see. Transparency is very important, and thank you very much for that. I wanted to ask you about the view from the other side, because you did mention, the revival of interest among the younger Jewish population of Israel about their roots. And, I witnessed it as well. Young descendants of Iraqi families, Moroccan families, specifically Morocco, because the relations are relatively good with Morocco. So there is kind of like this cultural revival also around music and food, of course, and so on. But I see that there is also something that is going on the other side, because at least before the war in Gaza, there have been quite a few series in the Arab world, Harat al-Yahoud, in the Egyptian TV about the Egyptian Jewish community before 1948. There were also other attempts, I think, to acknowledge the Jewish existence, to clean up the cemeteries. We've seen it in Libya. We've seen it also in Egypt, of course, definitely in Morocco. How do you experience this? Do you think that it's a phenomena? There's something that's going on, people suddenly start to discover the Jews that were, well, expelled, and banned from, their homelands and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think they always knew that they were there, but we have now a new generation of people in these countries who had no way of expressing their nostalgia, really. And one of the things that my videos do, and especially the ones where I interview Jews from the Middle East, which is one of the really most interesting series that I've produced, because it brings up a lot of emotions and memories among my audience, which is an audience of Arabs who are non-Jews. The nostalgia was always there, but I think it was sort of taboo for many, many decades to talk about those things, both in the Arab world, but I would say also in Israel. Israel looked down upon the ancestry, the heritage of these communities, because the elites that founded Israel were Ashkenazi European elites, and of course Arabic was considered, and still, as you mentioned, considered an enemy language. But as Israel became more mature, I think, there was more acknowledgement that Arabic and Arab culture is an integral part of Jewish culture and Jewish history. And yes, you see that also on the Arab side. But on the Arab side, there's still a lot of taboos and denial around it, both because of the traumatic way in which Jews left many of these countries. So there's some dark elements of history, right? In Egypt, for example, that basically banished the Jews. In Iraq, there was a very sudden departure of Jews through sort of an agreement maybe between their government and the government of Israel early on, but the whole Iraqi community emptied in 2 years. Yemen was another tragic example of a community that ended almost in 1 or 2 years. So There's a lot of unprocessed trauma. There's a lot of undealt with history that these countries haven't dealt with. And it's new for them to see Jews on their screens, thanks again to social media, that suddenly give them a whole other perspective in the language that they speak. And now I've expanded into TikTok and Instagram to try to reach even younger audiences that I wasn't reaching, on YouTube and Facebook, which is more my generation, let's say, of 35 plus year old people. So now I'm also reaching, Palestinians more and 18, 19, 20-year olds. And of course, the Abraham Accords have supported this process, especially in places like Morocco. But even in Bahrain, another peace country, there's a synagogue there, and suddenly Jews, and I saw this also in the Emirates, which I visited a number of times. Suddenly, Jews come out of the woodwork. We're talking about expats or business people who were hiding, kind of undercover for years in the Emirates. Suddenly, they can expose their religion, and the government suddenly, from one day to the next, celebrates this and uses it. And I think that's the reason why all these synagogues and cemeteries are being renovated, is because suddenly the governments see this as a source of pride. Because if they're honest about the fact that the Jews of their country, are separate from the state of Israel, which they dislike, so they need to celebrate the Jews of their country. And they understand that this is a form of connecting to the United States and to the West, which shows pluralism, a connection to Jewish communities. So there's ulterior motives, but I think there's also some authentic nostalgia and wish to reconnect to a history that's basically gone in the Arab world.
Yeah, specifically fondly remember the Harat Eliyahu series because I also wrote about that at the time, I think for the Times of Israel, a publication that you used to be a reporter for, because it really certainly hit some kind of nerve, this nostalgia nerve, I think, because, well, there was depiction of kind of a golden era, and of course, no era was ever golden, but certainly there were a bit better times for coexistence than what happened after. And it definitely felt like, well, we had something beautiful and we lost it for various reasons. Can
Mm-hmm.
it be revived again? So, I was wondering, and I know that you're dealing more with religious aspects in your blog and your YouTube page, but the current affairs kind of dominating our scene in the last 2 years, and the war in Gaza, unending and the war in Gaza, the 10/7 events, the massacre. Does it have an effect on what you do? How do you live it, and how your audience treats, this new trauma that piles on to the previous ones?
Yeah, it actually had a huge effect on my work in two significant ways. The first is that suddenly, the transition I had made from journalist to rabbi was kind of reversed, and I was almost pulled back against my will to the journalism world when I started getting phone calls on October 7th from Arab TV channels, BBC Arabic, Sky News Arabic, France 24, some in the Gulf,
Yeah.
Sky News Al Mashhad, even in Syria, channels that are calling me on a daily basis to be a commentator and a pundit. So suddenly, out of zero media work, I was suddenly, and still am, almost 2 years now into this war. Every day I'm on Arab TV. So suddenly I'm speaking to the same maybe audiences, but completely in a different hat. No longer the cultural rabbi educator hat, but now as a pundit and as a political commentator. So it's like, I don't know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's like two identities that live kind of separately alongside each other. But I've never stopped doing People of the Book. I've continued producing my videos every week. There are two main changes that happened. One is that at the beginning of the war, surprisingly, there was a huge increase in viewership of like 200% increase, but also a huge increase in hostility at the same time as the war began. To the extent that I had to shut down comments on Facebook for a few weeks, something I never did. I would never censor any comments unless they were very extreme incitement to violence. And that's all I was getting sort of in the first weeks of the war. So I decided that instead of just sitting there and deleting photos, graphic photos of mutilated people in Gaza, I would just shut down the comments for a while and let things calm down. And they did. So comments went back up. And the other thing I did was I started veering more into the political realm than I had ever intended because I always really wanted to separate politics from my project. But I felt like I couldn't be silent when there were hostages in Gaza. And especially since Judaism and Islam speak about the treatment of hostages, a behavior during wartime, even when you're in war with an enemy, what are the red lines that you don't cross? And I felt like I had an obligation and I had a voice that I had to, make public, even in my project. So I became, I would say, more political than I was before, but very cautiously. I didn't want to overwhelm my audience with politics, and I did it very, very cautiously and measuredly. And now I'm back to not doing really politics. But at the height of the war, in the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, I spoke directly about Hirsch Goldberg Polin, who was a hostage, unfortunately was killed, who I knew his family personally. I interviewed an imam in the north in Haifa about the need to protect civilians. I interviewed a rabbi about those things. I made my own videos. I even directly challenged in one video or two Khalid Mish'al and Hamas people directly. I always tried to keep the discourse more about culture and religion and not completely political, if you can even separate. But it's very, very hard. The bottom line is it's very hard in this climate to separate the religious from the political, and sometimes it's impossible. So just have to navigate that.
Yeah, this is something that many people in our region are trying to deal with. Can you really separate them? And again, with the little political experience that I have, I can tell you that perhaps an attempt to seclude politics and to distance it from other issues, spheres, and so on is a little bit damaging because then in the end, you leave the politics to professional politicians, which are perhaps the
Yeah.
worst kind of people to be dealing with these issues because politics belongs to all of us. Everything is politics in the end of the day, but that's my personal view, and this is also a subject for discussion for perhaps a future podcast. How do we deal with this? Because this is something that indeed it became a dirty word. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to be involved in politics. It's clear, but politics is involving us on a daily basis, whether you want it or not. So we have still a few minutes before the end of our discussion, Elhanan, and I wanted to actually ask you, in your head as a geopolitical expert. So it's been almost 2 years. And if you would ask me by October 8th, what will be happening after 2 years, I would certainly bet that the war would be over by the time. It was long, overdue, not only to my opinion, but also to many. But still, the war is here. It continues. People are still dying. Where are we going from here as Israel and as the region? Because we discussed now, with the positive trends that took place, in Israel, the Middle East, some rapprochement that happened, some agreements that took place. Where are we standing today? What is happening to the Middle East and what is happening to Israel in the Middle East?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think there's not one simple answer. One of the amazing things about this war is that there was a variety of outcomes I think Netanyahu spoke about 7 fronts that Israel was fighting at. I maybe would add now an 8th. He's fighting domestically, our own country, like an autoimmune disease, but we won't talk about that right now. We'll talk about our external enemies, right? The government is fighting. There have been amazing successes, right? Hezbollah has been debilitated and almost destroyed, and now the Lebanese government is the one that's trying to deal with the weapons of Hezbollah. That's an unimaginably amazing achievement. On the Syrian front, which was also a direct cause of the weakening of Iran and Hezbollah, and perhaps developments in Russia that we weren't part of directly. But the regime change in Syria, I think, has also been very promising, especially in weakening Iran's influence in Syria. So we have two of our neighbors, Syria and Lebanon, have been going in directions that seem, despite difficulties and hiccups on the way, very, very impressive chain of events, I think, in Israel's favor. Iran is an issue which was celebrated very much in Israel. I think we're still on the fence in a sense about where Iran is going. It's a very sensitive moment as we stand now. But I think here too we can say that despite the damage caused to the Israeli home front and cities, Israel has managed to overcome the barrier of fear with Iran and prove that it is able to act in Iran. The one issue that I am more pessimistic about is Gaza, and which seemed to be the easiest because the enemy there is the least well funded and the least armed, but here is where our domestic Israeli politics are getting involved and interfering with what could be another Israeli success story. And the reason why Gaza has not become the success story that Lebanon and Syria seem to be turning into is because of domestic politics that are preventing any type of resolution in Gaza that could be manageable. And it seems like even our last friend in the world, Donald Trump, has in the last 2 days spoken now publicly about how damaging Gaza is to Israel's public opinion and the need to end that war. And that means that especially given the direct clash now between our security establishment in its entirety, the entire security establishment, and the government of Netanyahu, something that we've never seen the likes of in Israel, such a direct clash between security and government. And not just security, of course, law, international law, all of this. I'm worried about where this is going. I don't think that there's a strategy. I don't think that it's managed. And it's very hard at this point to tell where Gaza is going and what the outcome is going to be. Whether a solution will be imposed on us eventually by the United States or other actors in the world, whether an Israeli internal dynamic that has to do with the army or civil society will dictate. But sometimes things can just unravel, and I'm very concerned, especially about the damage that's caused to the army and the prestige of the army and the cohesiveness, especially of the reservists. It seems like in a gradual process, refusing or the legitimacy of orders are being put into question. When the chief of staff is calling up soldiers to a war that he's publicly stating that he doesn't believe in, I don't think we've ever been in a situation like this before, where the chief of staff is saying he doesn't believe in a war, yet he's calling up soldiers. So I don't know where we're going in Gaza. The situation is very catastrophic, and it will take probably many years and decades and a lot of effort to rehabilitate it. But the rehabilitation needs to start. We need to have partnerships, and we need a government, especially, that's willing to rehabilitate Gaza. And that's not the government we have, unfortunately, right now.
Perhaps
So we're in a waiting stage. Yeah.
a word about Qatar and its regional role, also its relations with Israel, because after all, Qatar is also equal to the media empire that really influences here the media scene more than any other channel in the Arab language.
Right. And I used to be a regular guest on Al Jazeera. I used to be invited maybe 4 and 5 years ago to comment regularly on Israel's news headlines in a program called Mira'at al-Sahafa, the mirror to Israel's media. And Al Jazeera, I think, changed. I think there was an editorial change there that decided that Israelis are no longer are persona non grata on the channel, and Al Jazeera became basically a mouthpiece for Hamas. I think it is not functioning today as a professional news agency, and it's serving the agenda of Hamas. But it's a very effective tool because it is viewed very broadly around the Middle East and beyond. And Qatar is playing a very nefarious, duplicitous game where it's both the mediator and an actor and a partisan in a very serious way. I don't know how that can be reconciled. Such an avid supporter of Hamas. That's maybe why we have leverage, why it has leverage over Hamas, because it hosts Hamas. But very difficult to understand the interests there and how Qatar itself could be pressured into pressuring Hamas more. It's very complicated. It feels sometimes like a deal with the mafia, right? Where the person who's helping you is the person who is also threatening you at the same time. That's the reality we're in.
That's exactly the feeling, and given the involvement of Qatar in the Israeli internal affairs, meaning in the Prime Minister's office, it becomes even more complicated, difficult, and suspicious.
Absolutely.
Elhanan, before we conclude, I want to ask you another question about your project. Um, in general, it's a question not only about your project, it's a question about the interfaith dialogue in general, because you focus on, the religious sphere. And there is, among the, peacemakers, the peace organizations, there is always a question, what is the value of the interfaith project? Can you really convince somebody? Can you really, tell them that, you have to think better about certain religion, or perhaps some postulates in your own religion, they are not what you think. Is there a place really for, dialogue in the end, some influence, some change?
Well, I mean, that's a question that I grapple with myself. I don't have a conclusive answer. In my personal experience, when I see an Arab, a Palestinian gardener stop his work in the afternoon and pray, or when one time a woman at the checkout counter in a supermarket asked me to take the beer bottle and pass it through the checkout myself so that she didn't have to touch my beer, that caused an immediate sense of identification and closeness between us that I can only explain as sort of the kinship of religious people. Um, of course, there are unbridgeable gaps between religions and specifically between Judaism and Islam. But my strong faith, and I think it plays out now in 8 years of my work, is that religion is one of the most potent vehicles of humanization. In one of the things that the conflict does, it dehumanizes us, right? Israelis to Palestinians and vice versa. And when you see the other as a person like you, then it becomes harder to kill them. That's my belief. I think research also verifies this. And religion is one of the main ways in a very traditional society and very traditional Middle East that humanizes the other to us, even when they don't agree with us. So I have faith in that. But also on the political level, Ksenia, I think that religion is here to stay, right? Even if this government of ultra-nationalist religious people falls, we'll be back with people the likes of Naftali Bennett, right? Our previous prime minister, who was a religious person, and many members of his coalition were religious people. And surprisingly, the only Arab segment that was willing to play ball with mainstream Israeli politics was the Islamic movement headed by Mansour Abbas in Israel. And I really hope that experiment can be recreated in future governments. So religious actors on both sides are here to stay. Their power numerically is only going to grow in Israel when we look at the demographics. And we need to utilize and get them on board, because no peace solution will ever be possible if we alienate the entire religious population. Unfortunately, our late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin learned this the hard way, right? And the left camp learned the hard way that you can't remain so secluded. You have to expand the menu of languages and the menu of audiences that you speak to include religious actors. And I think more and more people on the left are also understanding this, or the center left. But it's still an experiment. We have no easy answers. I don't deny that the most radical players in our region, on our side and on the Arab side, are religious. But I think just as religion can be the problem, it can also, I hope, be the solution.
Sure.
And I'm trying to show and model how it can be one of the solutions, not the exclusive solution, but one tool in the tool of solutions. So I'm optimistic. That's why I do what I do.
Thank you very much, Elhanan. Thank you for your optimism. And please, for the sake of our viewers and listeners, tell us how is it possible to find your blog on social media?
Yeah, so it's called People of the Book. And if you Google People of the Book, there's a website that has some of the videos. But more easily to follow all the videos, it would be easier to follow me on Facebook or YouTube. Just put in People of the Book in the search, and you'll come up. The first result will be a little icon of a person with a drawing of a person with a kippah on his head. And that's my page. Most of my videos are subtitled into English and other languages. And they can be viewed even if you don't speak Arabic, although the content is in Arabic. So people of the book.
Incredible. Thank you very much, Elhanan. Thank you for your optimism and thank you for your great work. You've been listening to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. Our guest today was Rabbi Elhanan Miller, the founding director of People of the Book. We hoped you enjoyed the ROPECAST. Our podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all quality podcast platforms. We are very grateful to all our listeners in the Middle East, Europe, the US, and other parts of the world. You can support our work by small donation. More details on our website, ropes.org. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads to find out more about our work with the emerging leaders of the Middle East. I'm Ksenia Svetlova. Shalom and salam.